So in this video, I'm going to show you how to check if your square is square and how to potentially fix it if it's not square. As you'll see, I have two squares on my bench, two different types of squares. One is square and one is not square. Funnily enough, the one that's not square is brand new straight out of the packet. But I'm going to show you how you check if your square is square. So it's actually quite simple. Essentially, you just put your square on a piece of plywood. You do need to make sure that the piece of plywood has got a straight, flat edge. Preferably use the factory cut edge of the ply, which this is. So put your square up against the factory cut edge of the plywood, and then use a sharp pencil. I'm just using a mechanical pencil here. So we're just going to draw a pencil line on the inside blade of our square up the full length. And you probably can't see that on camera, but there is a pencil line drawn up the length of the piece of plywood there. And the next step, very simple, flip your square over. So originally with the square like this, we're now flipping it over on the same edge of the piece of plywood, and we're going to move it right to the mark where we just drew our line. And we're going to draw another line. And if this square is square, what we should see is simply one line. And as you can see there, there is one line. Both lines are on top of each other, and that basically means that that square is square. Now, if I take this square, which again, this square is brand new, never done a day's work in its life, and I'm going to do the same test again, making sure it is flat up against the factory cut edge of our plywood. And I'm going to draw a line again. And again, we have one line going up the length of the plywood. We're going to do the exact same thing again. We are going to flip our square around, bring it to our mark, and draw another line the full length up again. And of course my pencil has run out of lead. So we're going to draw a line all the way up again, and if this square is square, we again should see only one line. However, if we take a look at this line we just drew, you will see, or the two lines that I've just drawn, they both start right on top of each other on the same mark, and if we travel up the length of the square, you will see that they diverge at the top. So this square is not square, even though it's brand new and it's out of the packet. Having said that, done those tests, I generally don't recommend this type of square because it will go out of square a lot unless you heavily modify it and bolt it through like I have. This originally came with two metal pins and a set screw, and the set screw was useless, so I drilled it through and put 3 bolts in, and it now has enough, you can put enough torque on it to keep it square. But generally I don't recommend this type of square. I would recommend this type of square, but it just goes to show you that you need to check your squares even if they're brand new to see if they are actually square. But what I will show you is how to fix this. So even if you have this unibody solid framing square, carpenter square, you can actually get it back into square and it should stay there. So I'm just going to show you how to do that now. So on this test of this Magnuson square we just did, we could see that it is indeed out of square. The two lines diverge at the top. Now when we did the square in this orientation with this part of the square along the bottom cut of plywood and the blade of the square exactly on the mark that we did when we had the square in the other orientation. What happened there was, if we go up here, let's just move the square a bit, is the line was to the right hand side of the first line that we drew. Now what that tells us is that this square is squeezed in too much. If you can imagine that the square needs to be spread out more rather than squeezed in. So if the line was on the left hand side of that line, the second line, if when we have the square in this orientation, if the line was on the left hand side of the first line we drew, then we'd know that the square needs to be squeezed in rather than spread out. So in this case, the ends need to be spread out. And we can do that with a simple hammer and a punch or a bolster chisel or something. I'll show you how to do that now. So I'm now going to show you how to fix this square, or how to square this square. So as we saw with the lines we drew on the table, this square is too concave. It's too close together. The two ends of the square are too close together. They need to be spread out a bit so that the square is actually square. And we can do that quite easily with a hammer and a punch or a bolster chisel or whatever. And to do that, we just need to displace some of the metal of the square in the correct spot so that it realigns the square back into square. So as I just said, we need to take the two ends of our square and we need to spread them out a bit. And to do that, we take our punch, we would put it in this corner here, and we would hit it and hit the punch into the metal, which will displace the metal here, which essentially is pushing the metal out on the two ends and should push the ends of the square out a little bit. If the square problem we had was the other way around, that the square was too spread out already, too convex, the two ends were too far apart, and we could close them together by doing pretty much the same thing, except we put our chisel right down in this corner and again hit the square, which would displace the metal, pushing the metal out along here, and you can imagine those two ends closing in. So that's what we're going to do now. So you want to put your chisel right in the corner as best you can, and you want to take your hammer and give it a few whacks on either side. Right, so we've just whacked our square a few times, and we are going to do the same standard square test again. So if we can line up our square, hold it in place and draw a line. Flip it over. Line it up again on our original pencil line mark. Obviously, it's pretty crucial you get this lined up very accurately. Let's draw our line again. So we have now drawn the line again, the exact same test, and if we look up the length of our square, we now see one continuous line rather than on our previous test. There were two lines with nearly a 2 mil gap at the end of the square. So that essentially is a very quick way you can resquare a square, square a square that's straight out of the packet. I don't know, I haven't experienced this Magnuson brand all that much. What I will show you, if I can get the camera over here maybe, is that I think there is obviously some sort of issue with the quality of manufacturing with Magnuson, because this isn't my only Magnuson square. My other one, which I shall get down now, identical, and you will probably notice that it also has the same punch marks in the corner, and that is because I bought this square straight out the packet. It wasn't square, so I contacted the company I bought it from a company called Screwfix, which are a hardware store in Ireland and the UK. And I told them, hey, this square I bought from you, and incidentally, a T-square I also bought from them at the same time. Neither of them were square. So they immediately got back to me and they said, we're sending out 2 replacements, a new T-square, which they have sent me out, and a new square. The new T-square was pretty square. It wasn't 100% square, but the second square was not square, and interestingly, it was not square in the exact same way as the first one was not square. They were both too concave, and they had a run out of about 2 millimeters right in the end. So that is, it's not gone out of square in shipping. It's these things are coming out of the factory, not square. So again, I don't know much about the Magnuson brand, but they probably need to check on their quality assurance before they're shipping things. Having said all that, if you have an existing square or you've bought a brand new square, you should always check if they're square. These things, even if they're square when you first buy them, once you drop them, you use them for a couple of years, they can go out of square, and this is a quick way of fixing it. So as I mentioned, if you need to bring the ends of your square in a little bit, you can hit your punch on this corner. It'd be handy if I was actually in frame. You can hit your punch in this corner, and if you want to bring the ends of your square out a little bit, you can hit your punch in this corner, and that should hopefully re-square your squares, or in my case, square the 2 brand new squares you have that weren't square. I should mention that Screwfix did give me all my money back as well as the replacement, so I'm not out of pocket or anything, even though the 2 products I bought from them, which literally have square in the name of them, weren't square.